The first time she saw him, he didn't look at her at all. He was leaning against the kitchen counter, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, scrolling through his phone, completely absorbed. She thought maybe he wouldn't even notice her. The new nanny, the woman moving into his house temporarily to care for his daughter while he juggled the world of board meetings and travel. Yet, somehow, the moment she stepped inside, the air seemed to shift. She cleared her throat nervously, gripping the straps of her bag. "Good morning," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. He looked up, startled, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just his eyes meeting hers. There was no warmth, not yet, only a polite acknowledgement. "Morning," he said, his voice low, precise, measured. "You must be—" He glanced at the papers on the counter. "The new caregiver." "Yes," she said, forcing a small smile. "Eleonora. You can call me Ellie." He nodded once, like it was a transaction. Then he returned to his phone. She felt invisible. That wasn't new to her exactly. She was used to being quiet, blending in, working without making waves, but stung anyway. A tiny voice pulled her out of her spiraling thoughts. "Ellie." A little girl came barreling into the kitchen, hair messy from sleep and pajamas smeared with yesterday's chocolate breakfast. She looked like chaos wrapped in a smile. The widower's daughter. "Sophie." "Hi, Sophie," Ellie said softly, crouching down to her level. The girl didn't care about professionalism, titles, or silences. She jumped into Ellie's arms, giggling. "You're taller than I thought, and smell like light coffee." Ellie laughed, feeling some of the tension melt. "I do like coffee, and chocolate, but only one at a time." Sophie wrinkled her nose and shot him a glance across the kitchen. "Daddy, come see. Ellie can do cartwheels." He looked up again, and this time, his gaze lingered, brief but unmistakably present. There was a hint of amusement there, a trace of curiosity. She noticed it and immediately looked away, cheeks warming. The day passed in a blur of introductions, breakfast spills, school preparations, and Sophie's relentless chatter. Ellie found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, swept into the rhythm of this small, chaotic household. By the evening, she felt a warmth she hadn't expected, the kind that comes from being needed, being trusted, being quietly appreciated. But beneath that warmth, a whisper of unease threaded through her thoughts. She didn't belong here. She wasn't part of his world. Wealth, influence, social circles, business trips to exotic cities. She was a temporary fixture, a hired hand in someone else's life, and nothing more. That night, as she tucked Sophie into bed, the little girl looked up at her with wide, solemn eyes. "Do you like Daddy?" Ellie froze, her hand resting lightly on the child's shoulder. She smiled, careful not to reveal too much. "I like your daddy," she said, truthfully enough. "He seems kind." Sophie's lips pressed into a mischievous line. "You like him more than kind, don't you?" Ellie laughed softly, shaking her head. "I'm just here to help, Sophie. That's all." Sophie tilted her head, thoughtful. I think you like him. That's okay. He likes you too, you know." Ellie's chest tightened. The child's insight was both heartwarming and terrifying. It was one thing to care for Sophie, to enjoy the warmth of a household that had welcomed her. It was another entirely to realize she was starting to care for him too. The next morning, she arrived early, determined to stay professional, to remind herself of boundaries. He was already there, pacing the living room, phone in hand, a briefcase by his side. The corners of his eyes crinkled from stress, his jaw set in concentration. But she noticed something else. He was scanning the room, as if searching for something or someone. When their eyes met briefly, he gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, before diving back into his work. And yet, Ellie felt it, a flicker of recognition, a subtle acknowledgement of her presence. Their days quickly fell into rhythm. Mornings were breakfast chaos, afternoons were walks to the park, evenings were homework sessions and bedtime stories. Sophie's laughter was the soundtrack of the house, a constant reminder of why she was there. And in the quiet moments, when she passed him in the hallway, or found him staring out the window alone, Ellie caught glimpses of something more. Humanity beneath the polished exterior, vulnerability in the man who seemed untouchable. One evening, as they returned from a late walk in the garden, Sophie skipping ahead, he paused at the door, turning toward Ellie. "You did well today," he said, and there was a softness in his tone she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she replied, heart fluttering. She wanted to say more, to reach across the gap between them, but she swallowed the words. Professional, boundaries, temporary. Yet, even as she reminded herself of all the reasons she shouldn't, her mind kept drifting back to that one fleeting moment when he had looked at her with something like interest, something she couldn't quite define but already felt in her chest. That night, she lay awake in the guest room, Sophie asleep nearby, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The air felt heavier somehow, charged with a tension she couldn't shake. She wasn't supposed to feel this way about her employer. She wasn't supposed to imagine what it might be like if the man she was beginning to care for noticed her beyond her role as a nanny. And yet, there it was, a spark, tiny but insistent, in the depths of her heart, one that refused to be ignored, because she had already realized, in the short span of a few days, that she didn't just care for the child. She was starting to care about the man who had barely looked her way, who carried a world on his shoulders, and who, in some small, imperceptible ways, was beginning to notice her too. Ellie had barely settled into the rhythm of the household when the first warning sign appeared. A message from his assistant. "Ms. Price will be visiting this evening. Theodore requested you make arrangements for drinks in the study." Ellie blinked at the screen. Drinks? Study? Ms. Price? She didn't know the name, but she knew the weight behind it. Someone from his world, someone sophisticated, polished, and undoubtedly far from her own small, practical existence. By 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang, sharp and commanding. Sophie peeked around Ellie's legs, whispering, "Who is it?" "A grown-up who probably drinks fancy tea," Ellie replied, forcing a laugh she didn't feel. The visitor stepped inside, tall, elegant, and impossibly composed. Cassandra Price. She exuded effortless confidence, designer heels clicking against the hardwood, perfume leaving a subtle trail in the air. Her smile was charming, but precise, like it had been carefully measured for effect. She extended her hand toward Theodore, who straightened, suddenly transformed from the tired, distant father to the attentive, polished businessman she had seen in photographs. "Cassandra," he said warmly, shaking her hand. His tone carried history, familiarity, something Ellie couldn't quite place, and it stung. Ellie forced herself to the kitchen, busying herself with arranging drinks, trying not to eavesdrop, but utterly unable to ignore the conversation. Cassandra laughed at a story Theodore told about a business trip to Geneva. Her hand brushed his arm, casual, intimate like a long-practiced move. Every detail, the tilt of her head, the brightness in her eyes, the way Theodore smiled at her, felt like a spotlight highlighting all the ways Ellie didn't belong. Sophie, of course, noticed. "Ellie," she whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "She keeps touching Daddy. It's weird." Ellie crouched down, smiling at her 6-year-old, who had already developed a radar for anything threatening. "Sophie, it's fine. She's just friendly." "No, she's not just friendly," Sophie muttered, frowning. "Friendly people don't laugh that loud at Daddy's jokes." Ellie forced a soft chuckle, hiding the sharp twist in her chest. She kept herself occupied, pouring drinks, arranging snacks, but every giggle, every glance from Theodore toward Cassandra tightened the knot in her stomach. She felt herself shrinking, invisible in her jeans and simple sweater, while Cassandra moved through the room as if she were part of the furniture, effortlessly in control. "Ellie, come join us for a moment," Theodore called, his tone careful. She froze, heart thumping. "Since you're living here temporarily, it seems appropriate you're included." The words were polite, professional, and yet there was an edge of hesitation in his voice, as if he didn't want to see her discomfort. Ellie swallowed and walked over, putting on her brightest, most neutral smile. Cassandra turned toward her, eyes flicking with a subtle sharpness. "Ah, the nanny," she said smoothly, the words almost venom-wrapped in silk. "It's nice to finally meet you." Ellie nodded, keeping her voice light. "Likewise." The conversation began, but Ellie felt like an outsider in a world she didn't understand. Cassandra recounted business conferences, high-profile dinners, and encounters with people Ellie had only ever seen in magazines. Theodore laughed easily, remembering inside jokes she had no context for. She tried to participate, but her words faltered, her anecdotes seeming small and trivial compared to Cassandra's polished stories. Sophie, predictably bored, wandered off to play, and Ellie followed after her, retreating to the hallway, listening to the laughter that made her feel both fascinated and invisible. By the time Cassandra left, the house felt heavier, charged with tension. Sophie hopped onto Ellie's lap, whispering, "I don't like her. She's pretending to be nice, but she's not." Ellie hugged her tight, her own feelings mirrored in the child's simple, honest words. "I don't like her either," she admitted softly. "But we'll be okay." That night, Ellie sat in the quiet of the guest room, replaying every interaction, every glance, every laugh. She couldn't shake the envy twisting inside her. She knew it was irrational. She was just a nanny, temporary, replaceable, but that didn't make the jealousy any less real. She felt herself wanting him, needing him in a way that terrified her. And Cassandra had every advantage. Every polished move, every familiar laugh, every effortless charm that Ellie felt she could never match. The next day, Theodore was distracted. His messages were clipped, his attention divided. Ellie caught him checking his phone more than once, each time his expression softening briefly before he masked it with concentration. She wondered if it was Cassandra or if it was her. Later, while helping Sophie with her homework, Ellie felt his gaze across the room. Something unspoken passed between them, something complicated and frightening. She was falling into feelings she wasn't supposed to have, emotions that could complicate everything. And the sudden presence of Cassandra made those feelings sharper, hotter, impossible to ignore. That night, as Sophie slept, Ellie sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the steaming mug of tea in her hands. She was consumed with doubt and desire, torn between staying professional and acknowledging the ache in her chest every time Theodore looked her way. The sophistication, the charm, the effortless elegance of Cassandra Price had reminded her of her place in this world, or rather, her lack of it. And somewhere deep down, a small, stubborn part of her refused to accept it. She had seen how he smiled at her when she made Sophie laugh, how his eyes lingered for just a fraction too long, how he leaned in subtly, even when Cassandra was around. He wasn't hers, not yet, but he noticed her. He saw her, and that was enough for now to ignite a fire she couldn't control, a jealousy that would only grow stronger, a determination that no one, not even Cassandra, would overshadow her place in his life. Ellie woke to the sound of Sophie's excited chatter, bouncing around the kitchen with unmatched energy. "Ellie, Daddy said he's coming home today. He said he might be early." Ellie's chest tightened. She should have been thrilled. He was returning after a business trip, but her mind immediately turned to Cassandra. Had she been in touch during the week? Had she tried to reach him while he was away? The thought made her stomach twist. She poured Sophie's cereal, forcing herself to smile. When the doorbell rang, Sophie dashed ahead. "Daddy's home," she squealed. Ellie followed more slowly, heart pounding. Theodore stood on the doorstep, bags in hand, smiling at Sophie as if nothing else existed in the world. His gaze swept past her briefly before landing on her. The fraction of a second felt like a lifetime. Sophie flung herself into his arms. "I missed you," she cried. Theodore lifted her effortlessly, spinning her once before setting her down, ruffling her hair. His eyes lingered on Ellie again, searching, unspoken. "Welcome home," Ellie said softly, holding back a mixture of relief and anxiety. Inside, the house seemed warmer, familiar, yet charged. Theodore dropped his luggage in the hall and sat, watching Sophie chatter endlessly about her week. Ellie knelt beside them, laughing at her daughter's stories. For a moment, it seemed perfect. Then the sound of the doorbell shattered the calm. Ellie froze. Cassandra. She appeared impeccably dressed, papers in hand, smiling that precise, controlled smile. Theodore, she said smoothly. I thought I'd drop these off. Thought you might want to review them before tomorrow's meeting. Ellie's heart sank. She forced a polite smile. He's just returned from a long trip. Maybe later would be better. Cassandra's eyes flicked to her sharp. You're very protective of him, she said. There was no warmth in the words, only challenge. Ellie felt her chest tighten, anger flaring alongside the jealousy she had tried to suppress. I'm just being considerate, Ellie replied evenly, trying not to let her emotions show. Of course, Cassandra said, her smile tightening. I wouldn't want to intrude. But the glance she gave Ellie said otherwise. This was a battle, subtle and calculated, and Ellie was clearly on the front lines. Sophie tugged at Ellie's sleeve, whispering, Ellie, she's pretending, isn't she? Daddy doesn't even laugh like that with her. Ellie hugged her tight, whispering, You're right, kiddo. She doesn't know him like we do. The day dragged on, tension simmering beneath every interaction. Theodore was distracted, his attention pulled in two directions, and Ellie's heart burned each time Cassandra's name was mentioned in conversation. She busied herself with Sophie, planning activities, cooking meals, anything to keep her mind off the sharp pang of jealousy that never fully left. When evening arrived, Sophie was asleep, and the house was quiet. Ellie sat on the couch, staring at the shadows cast by the lamp. She couldn't stop replaying the day. The subtle touches, the careful smiles, the way Theodore's eyes softened when he looked at her. He noticed her. He saw her. But he also belonged to a world where women like Cassandra existed, polished and perfect in every way Ellie could never match. Her phone buzzed. A message from Theodore. Can you video call Sophie? I want to see her before bed. Ellie set up the iPad, letting Sophie chatter about her day while she listened, half distracted, half relieved. Theodore appeared on screen, his face lighting up the room. He laughed, genuinely, at Sophie's stories, but his eyes drifted to Ellie multiple times, searching. Miss me? Sophie asked suddenly. Yes, princess. Every day, he said, smiling at Ellie's direction without hesitation. The warmth of his gaze made Ellie's chest ache. He was here. He was watching her. He was noticing her in a way no one else did. After the call ended, Ellie sat in the kitchen, her mind swirling. She was falling for him. That much was undeniable. And Cassandra had only made the intensity worse. Every polished gesture, every laugh shared with him, every story she couldn't relate to made Ellie's feelings sharper, hungrier, impossible to ignore. The next morning, Theodore approached her in the kitchen. Ellie, can we talk? His tone was calm, careful, but Ellie could feel the gravity behind it. She nodded. About us, he said, leaning against the counter. I can't stop thinking about you. About how you make Sophie laugh. How you care. How real you are. Ellie felt her breath catch. You shouldn't. I'm your employee. I know. He interrupted gently, but firmly. But you're not anymore. You've resigned. His eyes searched hers. Or rather, I resigned you. I want you here for yourself. Not because you have to be. Her heart raced. Theodore, He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I know this is complicated. And yes, Cassandra has history with me. But she isn't you. She doesn't make Sophie laugh until she cries. She doesn't make me feel like I'm home when I'm around her. You do. Ellie swallowed, a mixture of panic and relief swirling inside her. She wanted to speak, to say the words she barely dared think. But before she could, Sophie ran in, clutching a drawing she had made. Daddy, look, Ellie helped me. Theodore crouched to take it, smiling at the chaos, at the life they had built in the small, ordinary moments. Ellie felt something settle inside her, a quiet certainty that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't invisible after all. Cassandra's shadow still loomed somewhere beyond the mansion's walls, but for the first time, Ellie realized that her connection with Theodore and Sophie, authentic, messy, impossible, was something no outsider could touch. And deep in her chest, a fire of determination ignited. She would fight, not just for herself, but for Sophie, for the rare, extraordinary moments she now realized she could belong to. No polished woman, no history, No world of power or perfection could take that away. She belonged here. She belonged to them, and she would not be pushed aside. The following morning, the mansion felt unusually tense. Ellie moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Sophie, who was still half asleep in her pajamas. Her mind replayed the previous evening, the way Theodore had spoken, the quiet certainty in his eyes. But Cassandra's presence lingered like a shadow, making her stomach twist. She couldn't shake the feeling that sooner or later, she would have to confront the woman who threatened everything she was beginning to feel for Theodore. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. She froze, heart hammering. Another surprise visit. Another challenge. She sighed, setting down the frying pan. Who could it be now? Sophie, rubbing her eyes, muttered, "Daddy, it's probably Cassandra. I can smell her bossy energy from here." Ellie couldn't help but laugh quietly. Even Sophie could sense it. Ellie opened the door to find Cassandra standing there, arms crossed, looking every bit the polished, unshakable woman Ellie had come to dread. "Good morning," Cassandra said smoothly, her gaze sweeping past Ellie to the open house, to the glimpse of Theodore coming down the stairs. "Cassandra," Theodore said cautiously, meeting her at the doorway. "What brings you here this time?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I thought we could finalize some details regarding tomorrow's business lunch. I didn't want to bother you at your office." Her eyes lingered on Ellie for a brief, measured moment, a subtle challenge. Ellie forced herself to stand tall. "I'm afraid he'll need some rest before his meetings. I can take the documents, though." She held out her hand. Cassandra's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she handed Ellie a slim folder with an air of superiority that was impossible to ignore. "Fine," she said. "I'll leave the rest to your discretion. Make sure he reviews everything properly." Once Cassandra left, the tension in the house seemed to dissolve slightly, but the unease lingered in Ellie's chest. She set the folder on the counter and poured herself a cup of coffee, trying to steady her nerves. Theodore appeared beside her, leaning casually against the counter, watching her quietly. "You okay?" he asked softly. Ellie nodded, but the truth was more complicated. I just hate how she shows up and makes me feel like I'm not enough." Theodore's expression softened, and he reached for her hand. "Ellie, you are more than enough. You're extraordinary in ways she'll never understand. Don't let her intimidate you." Ellie felt a shiver run through her. She wanted to believe him, and yet the knot of insecurity remained stubborn. Later that day, Sophie insisted on going to the park, dragging Ellie along despite the crisp air. Theodore had promised to join them after a short meeting, but Ellie found herself acutely aware of every passing stranger, every glance that might carry a hint of judgment or curiosity. When Theodore arrived, he jogged toward them, smiling as Sophie ran into his arms. Ellie watched him, a pang of jealousy slicing through her chest as he lifted Sophie effortlessly, spinning her once before setting her down. He was beautiful in motion, in laughter, in the simple way he seemed to belong in the world. And he belonged with her. Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, watch this," she cried, launching herself onto the swings. Ellie helped push her gently, laughing at her daughter's squeals of delight. Theodore crouched beside them, watching, his eyes bright and focused on the two of them. Ellie couldn't help the wave of emotion that washed over her. She loved this man. She loved Sophie. And she knew, without a doubt, that no one, not Cassandra, not anyone else, could take this from them. As they walked back home, Theodore fell into step beside her. "Ellie," he said quietly, his hand brushing hers, "about what I said yesterday, I meant every word. I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about how much I want to be part of your life, fully, with no pretenses." Ellie swallowed hard. "I feel the same way, Theodore. But it's complicated. You have a world I can't belong to. And then there's Cassandra." "Cassandra isn't the problem," he interrupted, his voice low, calm but firm. "She's part of my past. You're my present. And my future, if you'll let me." Ellie's chest tightened. "But what about appearances? What about the board? The media?" He smiled faintly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Let them talk. I'll face them. But I'm not letting them dictate my happiness." Not when you're involved. Not when Sophie's happiness is involved. We'll handle everything together as a family. The words sent a thrill through Ellie, but she also knew that actions mattered more than promises. She had to show Cassandra and the world that she was not someone to be underestimated, that her place in Theodore and Sophie's lives was permanent. Later that afternoon, Cassandra returned, determined and composed, expecting perhaps to find Theodore alone or vulnerable. Instead, she found Ellie reviewing the documents he would need for the next day's lunch, Sophie drawing at the table, and Theodore sitting nearby, his presence quiet but undeniably protective. Cassandra's sharp gaze swept across the room. "I see you've settled in." Ellie looked up, meeting her eyes without flinching. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Theodore's hand found hers under the table, a subtle but powerful statement of loyalty. Cassandra's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. "You're quite bold," she said, her voice tight. Ellie stood, taking a step closer, heart pounding but confidence rising. "I'm not here to compete or fight. I'm here because I belong. You may have a history with Theodore, but this is my life now. My family, and I won't be pushed aside." Cassandra's lips pressed into a thin line. She tilted her head, studying Ellie, measuring her. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "We'll see," she said, voice clipped, and left the house with a deliberate, controlled smile that did nothing. Ellie sank into the chair, hands trembling slightly. Theodore lifted her chin, his thumb brushing her cheek. "You were amazing," he whispered. "Strong, fearless, exactly what I love about you." Sophie, oblivious to the tension, bounded over. "Daddy, we won." Ellie helped me swing higher than ever. Ellie laughed, feeling the warmth of family, of home, and of the life she was fighting to claim. She knew Cassandra might return, that the world outside might whisper, judge, and challenge, but she also knew that her connection with Theodore, her bond with Sophie, was real, and nothing, no matter how sophisticated, polished, or threatening, could ever take it away. The following week, the mansion buzzed with a different kind of tension. Theodore's business world and Ellie's personal life were colliding in ways neither of them had fully anticipated. Rumors of their relationship had already begun to circulate quietly, and although the public didn't yet know the full story, the whispers were enough to make Ellie feel exposed. She had tried to focus on Sophie's schoolwork that morning, but her phone kept buzzing with notifications, emails, messages, news alerts. Theodore had warned her not to read the headlines, but curiosity gnawed at her, and finally, she gave in. The stories were harsh, though not completely unfair. CEO's nanny romance sparks controversy, one headline read. Another claimed, billionaire's heart caught by employee. Ellie's chest tightened. She knew the board would eventually weigh in, and she could already feel Cassandra's presence lurking in every corner of Theodore's world. Theodore, sensing her anxiety, appeared in the doorway with Sophie bouncing happily beside him. "Don't look at those," he said firmly, lifting her phone from the table. "They're wrong. All of it. People love drama, Ellie, but you're my reality. You're not a story. They're just words on a screen." Ellie tried to smile, letting his words settle over her. But the fear lingered. What if they were right? What if she truly was just an intruder in his world, a temporary figure in a life that had already been meticulously built without her? "Ellie, come on," Theodore said gently, guiding her by the hand. "We need a plan." By noon, they had transformed the mansion into a headquarters of strategy. Marcus arrived, already armed with statistics and media projections. Sophie wandered around, offering commentary on everything, blissfully unaware of the tension that hung in the air. "We need to control this narrative," Marcus explained, spreading documents across the dining table. "There's already chatter online. If the board thinks this is bad press, they'll react. But if we manage this correctly, we can turn it into a story of love, loyalty, and integrity." People respond to that. Ellie watched as Theodore nodded thoughtfully, fingers steepled. "We do this together," he said, looking at her. "Whatever happens, we handle it as a unit. Not just me, not just you. All three of us." Sophie clapped her hands, delighted by the notion of being part of the team. Yes. Team Walsh. Me, Ellie and Daddy. We're unstoppable. Ellie smiled, feeling the warmth of the family bubble around her. But the shadow of Cassandra still loomed, a reminder that even love could be challenged. That evening, Cassandra returned. She appeared at the mansion's front door like a force of nature, calm, composed, impeccably dressed. But this time, she was not carrying documents. She had come for a conversation, and Ellie could sense the tension immediately. "Theodore," Cassandra said smoothly, her eyes flicking toward Ellie. "We need to talk about your decision." Theodore stepped forward, subtly placing himself between Ellie and Cassandra. "We've already decided. My choice stands." Cassandra's lips pressed into a thin line. "Ellie, isn't it? I admire your boldness. But don't forget, there are consequences. His world isn't yours to enter lightly. One wrong move, and..." Ellie cut her off, her voice steady, eyes unwavering. "Then I'll take that risk. I belong here just as much as you ever did. And I won't be intimidated by someone who thinks charm and money give them control over my life." Cassandra's eyes narrowed, studying Ellie as if trying to dissect her entirely in a single glance. Then, unexpectedly, she tilted her head and smiled. Cold, calculated, but with a trace of respect. "You're stubborn. Very well. Let's see how long that lasts." After Cassandra left, Theodore exhaled deeply, wrapping an arm around Ellie. "You were incredible," he murmured. "Absolutely fearless." Ellie leaned into him, letting the tension of the day melt against his chest. I can't let anyone take what we have. Sophie, us. It's too important." "I know," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And neither of us will let that happen. No one." The next morning, the reality of their situation hit them in the form of the board. Theodore's assistant delivered a formal invitation, an emergency meeting to discuss the optics of his relationship with Ellie. She tried not to flinch, but Theodore caught her hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. At the meeting, the tension was palpable. 12 board members sat around the massive conference table, eyes sharp and voices sharp with authority. "Mr. Walsh," Gerald Martin began, "your recent personal decisions have raised concerns. There are perceptions that this relationship may interfere with leadership and company stability." Theodore met each gaze steadily. "I appreciate your concern, but my personal life has not interfered with my leadership. The company is thriving. Quarterly profits are up. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. The Yamamoto merger is secured. I make no apologies for choosing happiness." A murmur passed through the room. Another member spoke. "There are still optics to consider. A relationship with a former employee." "She is no longer my employee," Theodore interrupted firmly. "And the optics you're worried about are irrelevant when the truth is this. She makes my daughter happy. She makes me happy. And nothing else matters." Ellie's heart raced as she watched him defend her so fiercely. She realized in that moment that this wasn't just about romance. This was about respect, about being seen and valued for who she truly was, not her title or lack of one. The board deliberated, but Theodore's unwavering conviction and his careful presentation of metrics and logic won them over. By the end of the day, the vote was called off. He emerged from the meeting triumphant, his eyes immediately seeking Ellie's. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he said, pulling her into his arms. "We did it. Together." That evening, the mansion was alive with celebration. Soft laughter, warm hugs, and the sense that no matter the world outside, they had claimed their place in each other's lives. Sophie ran circles around them, squealing with delight, completely oblivious to the challenges they had overcome. Ellie watched Theodore laugh with Sophie, saw the ease with which he fit into her life, and realized something profound. Love was worth every risk, every whispered judgment, every challenge from the world. Cassandra might try to return, the board might try to interfere again, but this family, this connection, this bond was unshakable. For the first time in a long while, Ellie felt entirely, completely, terrifyingly certain. She belonged. The mansion was unusually quiet that morning. Sophie was still asleep, wrapped in her blanket like a little fortress, and the sun cast golden streaks across the polished floors. Ellie sat on the patio, coffee in hand, trying to steady her nerves. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day they would face the world together, fully and openly. Theodore appeared beside her without a sound, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Morning," he said softly, eyes warm. "Morning," she whispered, though her heart raced. He glanced at the papers in her lap, noticing the slight tremble of her fingers. "You don't have to worry about the press," he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "Not today. Not ever, if I can help it." Ellie gave a small laugh, though tension still lingered. "I've been through enough tabloids in my life to know it's never that simple." He leaned close, brushing his lips against her temple. "Then let's make it simple. Together." Later that afternoon, the board had been informed that Theodore was no longer hiding anything. Transparency was their new ally. Instead of waiting for the journalists to spin the story, they arranged a carefully planned announcement. Theodore would host a press conference in the mansion's garden, accompanied by Ellie and Sophie. Ellie had insisted on being present. She was ready to stand beside him, not behind him, not in the shadows. She had fought for this love, and now it was time to live it unapologetically. The garden was a flurry of activity. Cameras were being positioned. Reporters murmured amongst themselves, and Sophie insisted on wearing a princess dress despite her protests. "You're representing our family," Ellie reminded her. Sophie grinned mischievously. "Then I shall be royal." Theodore looked at Ellie, admiration and awe in his eyes. "You're incredible," he said quietly. "No one else could do this." She shook her head, a soft smile on her lips. "We do it together. Always." When the conference began, the journalists were relentless, but Theodore's confidence never wavered. He spoke clearly, calmly, and passionately. "Yes, I am in a relationship with Eleanor Turner," he announced. "She is a remarkable woman who has brought joy back into my daughter's life and into mine. Sophie and I are happier than we have been in years, and this happiness will not compromise my ability to lead this company. In fact, it strengthens it. Eleanor is a person of integrity, intelligence, and kindness, and I am proud to stand beside her, publicly and privately." A few murmurs ran through the crowd, reporters scribbling notes, some nodding with approval. Ellie stepped forward, heart pounding. Her voice was firm but kind. "I am Eleanor Turner. I have cared for Sophie for the past 3 years, and in that time, I've grown to love this family as my own. I will continue to care for Sophie, and I will continue to love Theodore as I've come to love him, with honesty, respect, and unwavering devotion. Nothing else matters more than that." The room fell into a stunned silence for a moment. Then cameras clicked, journalists scribbled furiously, and Theodore's hand found hers. After the conference, the headlines were unanimous. Walsh love story. CO stands by nanny-turned-partner. Underdog romance wins over billionaire board. Sophie's guardian angel becomes family. Public sentiment shifted overnight, and the couple finally felt what it was like to be free from judgment. That evening, back at the mansion, the three of them, Theodore, Ellie, and Sophie, sat on the terrace, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Sophie rested her head on Ellie's shoulder, whispering, "We did it, didn't we?" Ellie smiled, brushing Sophie's hair back. "Yes, baby, we did it." Theodore wrapped an arm around both of them. "I promised you we'd get through it together," he said, voice soft but steady. "And we have. Now it's time for the next step." Ellie looked at him, heart fluttering. "The next step?" He pulled something small from his pocket. A velvet box, familiar but no less electrifying. "I know we've been careful. We've taken it slow, respected boundaries, and fought our own fears. But there's no more waiting. I don't want to spend another day without you officially in my life, Eleanor Turner. Marry me." Ellie's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh my God. Yes. Of course. Yes." Theodore rose from one knee, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around. Sophie cheered from the side, her little hands clapping excitedly. "My mommy and daddy are engaged. We're having a wedding." The kiss they shared after that was everything. The promise, the relief, the joy, the passion of years, unspoken, finally given form. When they pulled apart, Ellie held the ring on her finger, staring at it with disbelief and wonder. "Now what?" she whispered. "Now," Theodore said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We live our lives without fear. We face the world together as a family, and we enjoy every single moment along the way." The months that followed were filled with quiet moments and grand adventures, stolen kisses in the kitchen, laughter echoing down the halls, and plans for a wedding that Sophie designed herself, complete with unicorns, chocolate fountains, and an endless supply of balloons. Theodore and Ellie navigated life together, blending their worlds seamlessly, proving that love could thrive in the most unexpected places. Ellie often marveled at the transformation, not just of Theodore's life, but of her own. She had once felt invisible, small, unsure she belonged. Now, she was not only seen but cherished, valued, and celebrated. Her heart had found its home, and she had never felt more certain of anything. One night, as they sat together under the stars on the patio, Sophie asleep upstairs, Theodore pulled Ellie close. "I love you," he whispered, voice low and tender. "I love you," she replied, leaning into him, completely without fear. "And we're unstoppable," he added, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Ellie laughed softly. "Yes, we are." Theodore kissed her once more, softly, fiercely, fully, sealing the promise of their future. The mansion, once quiet and imposing, now felt alive with love, laughter, and hope. For the first time, Ellie knew without doubt that she was exactly where she belonged, right beside the man she loved, with the little girl who had changed both their lives, and a family they had built together, unstoppable and unshakable. And as the stars blinked overhead, the world felt impossibly large, yet perfectly theirs.